Yeah, you can take it to the bank. Hold the line. Hey,
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back to Take It to the Bank podcast. I'm your host, Ben Ballou. And this week, guys, we have got a treat for you. Now, you may not have heard of this kid's name, and I call him a kid. How old are you now?
23.
23. I mean, he's kind of a kid to me. But you will hear of the name Harmon Marien, I promise you. He's only fished one open, got paid in it, has fished the Bass Nation regional qualifiers. Dude's top 5 to every single one that he's fished, besides one that he kind of had some boat issues or some wave issues or something. Dude's an absolute hammer. Talks a little funny because he's from Wisconsin. And this week we are going to be talking about some northern fisheries, mainly some inland stuff. We've talked about the Great Lakes quite a bit with some other pros. Want to welcome to the show Mr. Harmon Marien.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Appreciate it.
There's our live studio audience coming in there. We give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Everybody in fishing right now is talking about all these college kids and how good they are and how much that college fishing has raised the bar for professional fishermen. And it's absolutely true. Harmon and I filmed a TV show together back last year. And I'm like, ooh, this kid kind of knows what he's doing. And we traveled a little bit together, fishing Bass Nation stuff, and dude's a hammer. So really want to thank you for coming on. And you are a recent graduate of McKendree, right?
Yes, sir.
And you basically went to college so you could fish.
Yes, the decision of where I went to school was, 100% based around college fishing. I had like 5 or 6 schools in mind, and absolutely they were all based off of their college fishing team.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your college fishing experience and kind of, how you got into it and that kind of thing. And let's learn, I'd like to learn how you got so damn good.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer for that second half of it there, but I grew up in Wisconsin. There's not a ton of high school fishing opportunities in Wisconsin. The surrounding states have a lot more for whatever reason. So we basically had 2 tournaments a year at the high school level. We had a TBF state tournament and a Bassmaster state tournament. I was fortunate enough a couple times throughout high school to qualify for the national tournament. And then FLW, TBF, now MLF, that conglomerate. They also had the World Finals, which while I was in high school was held in lacrosse, which is super.
That's handy. Right.
Yeah, super convenient. So really before college, I hadn't fished outside of, Minnesota or Wisconsin more than 5 or 6 times. Maybe family trip to Florida, I bring a rod and fish in the pond behind the resort. But
Right.
other than that, really before college, I didn't have too much of an experience outside of Wisconsin and Minnesota. But I didn't know if college fishing was even a reality for me. It's a lot, I think, easier now. I think it's just more prevalent. More kids are doing it. The pathway is a little more defined. The connection between high school and college fishing is a lot clearer than it was when I first went through. But I looked at the ACA standings, school of the year, and McKendree at that time had won the national championship 2 years in a row. So obviously that was number 1 on my list. But I picked 5 or 6 other schools. Me and my dad actually for a week just drove around from Wisconsin to Georgia, the Carolinas up to Illinois, and just made the rounds, Tennessee, and visited a couple schools. And when I left McKendree, it was pretty obvious to me that that's where I wanted to go.
That is awesome. So you started fishing your freshman year, and then last year you were kind of a 5th-year senior.
Yeah, I got my master's. Let's make that clear too, by the way.
Didn't know you had your master's here. Let's throw that out there.
I'm just saying, it didn't take me 5 years to get a 4-year degree. That's all I'm trying to clarify. But
and that's saying something that you were able to get your master's in 5 years with the amount of time that you spent on the water. Like, I know you and I had talked, we stayed together at the Bassmaster Classic this year, and that was in mid to late March this year. And I think you had let's say it's the end of March and you had missed 8 days being on the water all year long. That's why you're so damn good.
Yeah, college fishing, and well, to back up to the grade aspect, the teachers and professors were great. I know they're not like that at every college, and I was very fortunate to where they all worked with me. If I gave my schedule ahead of time and said, January, I'm gone pretty much the whole month. February, I'll be here for 3-4 days. But they were willing to let me work ahead of time, take tests when I was on campus, and do a lot of work on the road. But yeah, it afforded me the opportunity to fish places and be on the water way more than I ever would have been able to.
Now, you had some success in college as well, right?
Yeah. I didn't have anything outrageous happen, I wouldn't say, but I was competitive. So I'd say it's fair.
Not exactly an Easton Fothergill, but
No.
still towards the top.
Yeah, I college fishing is a totally different animal than anything I fished afterwards. I talked to a lot of my good buddies that fish college and outside of college, and it, it's so different. The team aspect changes a lot. It just seems, I don't want to say easier, but it's easier to predict where you're going to end up outside of college. Those college events, I mean, just with two guys fishing, the odds of someone catching I don't want to say random, but like a off the wall big one that jumps them way up, it just happens way more with two guys fishing. But I mean, at the end of the day, the best still finish near the top. But yeah, it's totally different. I mean, I have a good friend, Ethan Fields. He says the same thing. We go to college events, and he's like, I don't understand why it's so much harder to catch him here than normal. And he fishes the Opens and Toyotas and everything in between. But yeah, college fishing's a totally different bear, and the competition level, I think, is way higher than most people would expect it to be.
No, I think, and I mean, for God's sakes, the Nut brothers are fishing in college right now, and they're as hot as two kids. Bank Shaw was really good in college. Patrick Walters he's closer to my age, but he was dominating college tournaments then. Like, the guys that are at the top at the college level are going to be pros if they choose to do that route, because they're that good. And the thing about it, in my opinion, is they're traveling around the country fishing all these tournament fisheries, the St. Lawrence River, the Harris Chain in Florida, herring lakes in Alabama, in Georgia and South Carolina, the Gunnersvilles, the Tennessee rivers, the Highland Reservoir. Like, you've got an experience all around the country, and somebody else is paying for it for the most part.
Yeah, that's, I think, the biggest thing for me is there's just no way I ever could have justified financing that, or yeah, it just wouldn't have happened. But you're paying for an education, and they're supporting you along the way. And yeah, to your point, I mean, tidal fishery is something I would have never touched in my life if it wasn't for college fishing. That's just an example. But yeah, we get to see everything, which is, I mean, and honestly, you look at the elite schedule, the BPT schedule. I mean, the college kids, Opens, Toyotas, Invitationals, you name it. The college fishing schedule is more tournaments than any other series you're going to fish. I mean, we're fishing 12, 13 events a year, and we only have 1 or 2 over the summer, maybe outside of school. So for that time we're in school, we're on the road a lot. You think 9 events is normal for, a full circuit. We're fishing more than that every year.
And that's because you're fishing FLW or MLFs, you're fishing Bassmaster, you're fishing the ACAs. Like, there's 3 or 4 different, I guess there's 3 different circuits that you're all fishing. It's like when Ish Monroe or John Cox fished the FLW Tour and the Bassmaster Elite Series in the same year. That's what you guys are doing. That's the
norm. Yeah.
Well, obviously, by the way you talk, you're not from my part of the world, and we're not going to talk about my part of the world. This episode's going to be focused on going up north, specifically, a guy that's not from that area. And you're fresh off a top 20 in the Open at Leech Lake, and you top 20'd against some absolute hammers. The Randall Tharps, the Ish Monroes, the list goes on and on of guys that are fishing the opens. A bunch of Elite Series guys hopped in it because it was in between tournaments up there. Let's talk a little bit about Leech Lake and how you decided to catch him. Now, Laker Howell ended up winning that tournament. He, I think he won it on a frog catching largemouth. And when we're talking about these inland lakes, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, wherever you go, you almost have to make a choice on whether to target largemouth or smallmouth. Do you let the individual body of water determine that, or are you specifically going for smallmouth? Are you specifically going for largemouth? How do you determine which species you're going after, or do you try to do a mix?
Obviously Leech Lake, fortunately enough for me at least, there was an open there last year. So I mean, you saw the weights were last year were pretty heavily dominated at the top by guys catching smallmouth, even if they didn't have a limit each day. I mean, there were guys that finished up there, I think in the top 10 that didn't have a limit one day of the tournament. So going in for me being, very comfortable with smallmouth, that's how I made my decision I didn't cast for a largemouth all week. But otherwise, when I go all these, around me, there's thousands of lakes, literally. And normally, you can look at the map. We'll do that here in a little bit, obviously, but you can just look at the habitat and kind of tell which one does it lean to more so. But normally the smaller, let's say less than 10,000 acre lakes, there's one that dominates for sure. It's not really equal. So, and it normally it's pretty obvious. Like you'll put in your boat in the water, and within the first hour and a half, it's pretty obvious. Which one dominates. If the smallmouth dominate, you'll be fishing the reeds, catching smallmouth. And if the largemouth dominate, you could be fishing rock off the bank and you'll be catching largemouth. So once you put your boat in the water, it can be pretty obvious pretty quick.
And then what you said right there makes a lot of sense as well. Let's pull it up on the map. Let's look at it. If half the lake is covered in grass and lily pads and reeds and stuff like that, then most likely it's going to be largemouth dominated. But if it's a giant bowl like St. Clair, nobody's catching largemouth on St. Clair. Everybody's catching smallmouth. So let's break down Leech Lake, and I'm going to pull that up here. Here we go. Can you see that? Okay. All right. So here we have Leech Lake. It is in, I would call it north central Minnesota. Way up here. And is anywhere you go, in my opinion, up north, the fishing's phenomenal. There's very few shitty fisheries, in my opinion, up north. They've all got a lot of fish in them, and a lot of people don't target bass when you get north of Illinois. Like everybody's talking about the walleyes and the pikes and the muskies, and everybody's so excited about those. You meet them at the boat ramp, and they're like, "Look at that sparkly boat over there, and you guys catching any walleyes?" I'm like, "No, dog, we trying to fish for bass." And they're like, "Oh, I caught 43 of them bastards while I was trolling for walleyes." And I'm like, okay. So they don't get fished for a lot. And the other part of it is they've got ice over their head half the year, 3 or 4 months out of the year. Whereas, so they don't get the pressure. A fish on Guntersville is going to get casted at every single day throughout the year. To whereas, fish on Leech, they may not be hardly as many of them, but they're going to get a break. And that's, to me, it's a little bit easier up there. Fish are where they're supposed to be, and a lot of times they bite. Now, weights are a lot tighter, which makes tournament decisions a little bit harder. But everybody's going to catch fish. It's rare that you zero on a lake up north. So do you want to look at this on Google Maps, or just looking at it here with the topo is good enough?
Yeah, that's good enough for me.
Okay. So when you first see Leech Lake, obviously you've done some research with some tournaments and that kind of thing, but what do you see here? A lot of the blue there looking largemouthy, let's say, or do you try to go catch the smallmouths?
Yeah, when I first look at Leech, there's a lot of bays. Like it's not a very basin-oriented lake.
Okay.
So that right away shows me that there's probably a pretty good largemouth population. And then the second thing I notice is the main basin is pretty centralized on one little part of the lake. It's not really in the dead center on the south end there. You
Right.
can kind of see that's the main basin, which Leech isn't super deep. So, those fish can pretty much live in any depth in Leech. So I would assume right away that the smallmouth population is going to be based around that main basin.
Okay. And as I zoom in here and you really pick up the details on the contours, man, this thing's got a lot of points. It's got a lot of drop offs. I'm assuming most of this stuff out here is rock.
Yes.
So you made your decision just purely based on past tournaments that were up there that you were targeting you were targeting smallmouth. And how many guys out of the top 10 were specifically targeting smallmouth?
I think 9 out of the 10. There might have been 1 or 2 guys who did a little bit of both, actually. I think there were 2 guys that did a little bit of both. 7 of them that were strictly smallmouth, and then Laker 1 with just large.
And to be honest, that seems to be kind of the theme for me. Even if you look at lakes like Oneida or you look at lakes like Champlain, both of them have a really healthy largemouth population.
Mhm.
But even on Champlain, the smallmouth dominate, especially now forward facing sonar.
Yeah.
They're usually a little heavier. A smallmouth is always going to be more dense than a largemouth is, and I don't know why.
I don't have a scientific reason. I have a guess, but I don't want this to be taken as fact. Those, in my mind, the smallmouth focus on crawfish way more than a largemouth does. Every day my live well was filled with crawfish at the end of the day. So that's my assumption. And, largemouth they eat a little bit of everything, but I think that's maybe why they weigh a little more. Another thing with Leech that's a little unique is they have rusty crawfish in there, rusty crayfish, however you want to say it, an invasive species. But when a lake gets the rusties in there, they take off and the whole place is filled with crawfish. And I think while I didn't catch all my fish on crawfish imitating baits, I honestly don't know if some of those smallmouth eat anything other than crawfish. Dang near year round.
How did you know the rusty crawfish were in there?
I just looked it up ahead of time. Just there's lakes around the house that have the rusties in them, and it's the exact same thing. Once they're in there, it doesn't take long, and the whole lake is jam packed with them. I actually, in practice, had dropped an aquaview down on a couple boulders, and the entire sides, up over the top, the bottom was just covered in them. And I can't tell you how many times this week, if your bait hit the bottom and you drug it, even 15 feet, typically you had a crawfish on there and you'd have to literally shake them off, or they'd just hang on and you'd reel them all the way into the boat and have to literally pull them off your bait and throw them back. There were so many. Yeah.
Okay. So when we're looking at Leech here,
Mhm.
you noticed, you said that the main basin is right here kind of on the south end. Got a couple of islands here, but this is your deepest water. This is your main basin. Is that where you kind of started your search?
Yes.
Now,
Yeah, it
where
was,
where do tournaments come out of?
Walker Bay. So on the left, like the farthest left bay on the south end.
So
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Yeah, we came out of there.
Okay. Now it looks like a lot of deep water in this bay. Did you look in here?
I never did. Quite frankly, it was kind of a thing if I thought I could figure out 3 or 4 areas on the main basin, I was gonna go look at it, maybe just because it'd be pressured a little less.
Mhm.
But smallmouth are big water fish. I figured the majority of the population would live out on the main lake, and I think if it wasn't so windy on day 2, I think the event would have for sure been one of smallmouth out on the main basin.
Okay. We've made our decision now. We're deciding to focus on this area right here. Got a ton of contour. When you really look at it here, this giant flat right here that's from 14 to 19 feet, a reef here, got tons of points and drop offs and that kind of thing. When you are looking to start and you're seeing, here's a big hump with a big, sharp bluff here. Here's another one in 26 that drops off to 45. You get over here, here's a giant flat with reefs around it and drops off into deep water, lots of different points, lots of different things like that. How are you starting your search on something that has this much contour?
Yeah, so first thing I noticed when I launched the boat is the water clarity was not great. It's not like one of those northern lakes where you can see down 15 foot. There's probably 3-4 foot of visibility. And
Which is not super clear. Like that's clear for where I live, but
yeah,
that's not clear for up north.
pretty dirty. Yeah.
Right.
For up north. And so right away to me, I assumed, the majority of the population was going to live less than 20 foot.
Okay.
Just when it gets stained like that, normally I mean, obviously there's some randos, but for the most part, the population doesn't live that deep. And then I ran to, I always try to the most obvious area. So if we like Huddle's Reef right there, it's a giant flat right by the side of the basin. I mean, it stands out on the graph, and I just started idling over it, seeing what it had. What I noticed is half of it had no rock on it at all, and the other half was full of rock. So once you just want to get a gauge: is rock common everywhere? Is it more isolated? But I mean, half that giant flat there is covered in rock. And then from there, I marked a few things. On side scan, I marked boulders, transitions from rock to sand, as well as any like dips in the rock. I made like 2 or 3 passes over. It wasn't like I spent a ton of time doing that.
And this is a giant area.
Yeah, it's huge. And it wasn't like I was zigzagging back and forth and making sure I was getting everything. I mean, I just made a Z across it and marked a couple things I thought were unique or could hold a smallmouth, and then put the trolling motor in the water and checked those 3 things out right off the bat, and became pretty obvious pretty quick that the only thing that, for me, really, especially the beginning of practice, that held the bass was a boulder.
Wow, smallmouth like boulders.
Yeah.
That is some shocking stuff that you've heard right here on the podcast.
I was really hoping, especially after the tournament last year, I think boulders, everyone talked about it, but I was really hoping that some of that transition stuff would hold some fish, just because it'd get less pressure. And in the beginning of practice, it really didn't. I mean, I found some what I would normally consider really good looking smallmouth habitat, and it was completely barren. And if that same transition had one boulder on it, there'd be a fish on it.
When you're graphing for boulders, are you looking for a giant boulder field because it's going to hold the most fish, or are you going and looking in the places that there's very few rocks, just looking for a few isolated ones?
Just on the fishery, so that actually changed for me throughout the week. So beginning of practice, like I said, I just marked boulders, and when I made that first Z across, I had 2 that were isolated, like nothing else around them for probably 300 feet. And then I had 2 sections where there was one probably had 7 or 8 boulders, and the other one probably had 13 or 14 in a small area. In beginning of the week, those isolated ones were the best. I mean, you could pull up to a big isolated boulder, and I mean, there'd be a school of 3 to 8 fish on it. But as the week progressed, I noticed even towards the last day of practice, after 3 days, there's less fish on those isolated boulders, as well as good luck getting them to bite for the most part. But those groups of boulders, those fish had I think the pressure had kind of pushed them off. And then you get in those areas and you just have to fish, 7, 8, 10, 15 boulders in that area. And only one of them or maybe 2 of them would have fish on them. But that was something that changed throughout the week, and I think that was just directly based on fishing pressure.
Did you look in any bays or anything like that, up here towards Bear Island, all the way up north a little farther? Did you spend any time up in any of these bigger arms in the center of those looking for stuff, or did you specifically stay down south? I mean, it looks like that area, just from looking at it on the map, it's the first time I've ever pulled it up. Mm-hmm. But right here's a pretty shallow reef and quite a bit of contour change. But as a whole, the the south end looks a lot better than anywhere else does.
Agreed. That's where I spent the first 2 days of practice, I'd say, was pretty much exclusively on the south end, and then out by the big island, Gull Island. Well, Gull Island's a little part there. Pelican's the big one, but um, that's where I spent the first 2 days. And really and truly, it's because after day one, I didn't feel great about practice. I didn't have a good first day. I felt like I knew what I was looking for, but just didn't find enough of it. And then at the end of day one, I found one area that I thought had a good population. And then day two, I decided instead of venturing off somewhere else, just to kind of expand on it, just to try and not get too spread out. And also, the reason I spent a lot of time on the south end is day one of the tournament, or what was supposed to be day one. There's supposed to be really like big winds out of the south. So I was hoping I'd just be more efficient if I could find fish on the southern half of the lake. But that's why I spent the first 2 days. And then day three, I ventured up north a little bit, especially on the west bank there, all the way up to that. I know there's fish up in that area. I know guys caught them up there. I didn't go quite this far, but it kind of got to the point where, I mean, they're glacier lakes for the most part. The rock's fairly predictable on where it is. I mean, if there's a point, there's probably rock off of it. So it kind of got to the point where running that wasn't really beneficial for me. Looking for fish, it was more just mark the isolated boulders or the larger boulders in an area. But then I spent a lot of the last day in the middle of nowhere looking for hopefully one of those random, like super isolated, nothing else around boulders.
Did you find any of those?
One. I did find one of them, and I never was able to get on it because every time I drove by, there's a boat sitting on it. Which seems to be the story of the opens. Those guys find everything. But that's how I broke up those or made the decision where I went the first 3 days.
Well, let's dive into how we're catching these smallmouth. Now we're fishing against 200 guys, and where do you start? What rods are on your front deck the very first day? I mean, obviously you said rusty crayfish. You had looked at, past tournament results and done some research on the lake, found out they were in there. So you knew that most of your baits were going to imitate that. So are you starting off with like a Ned rig or a little jig, something like that? Or, drop shot, minnow? Tell me your 5 smallmouth baits that are always going to be on the front of your deck anytime you're fishing any of these inland northern lakes.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, it's pretty consistent. No matter where we're at up north. I mean, I had on 2 minnows. I had on a 5-inch and then a larger 6 or 7-inch minnow. And then I had on a small jig with a Ned rig on the back of it. And then I had on 2 drop shots, one with a nose hook and one with like a longer shank where you can thread your bait up on it. Those were if I had to say 5, that was the most predominant 5 that I think I had on the deck all week, even until the last day of the tournament.
What size heads are you throwing on your minnow? Can I get you to say minnow one time?
Minnow.
There we go.
We go. It doesn't sound right, does it? You got to admit. It didn't sound right coming out of my mouth.
Oh.
I started with, I think I had a 3/16 on the 5-inch, quarter on the 6 or 7. Again, that's pretty consistent for me. Largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass is a little different. Largemouth, smallmouth, that's pretty consistent. I knew I wasn't going to be fishing super deep again because of the watercolor. So, I mean, I changed that around a little bit throughout the week. But starting off, that's 95% of the time. That's what I'm using.
Now, your minnow setup, are you using short leader and 14-pound line, or tell me about your minnow setup?
Yeah, starting off, I'm pretty much always 15-pound leader, probably 3 foot long. Is what I tie it up as. I'll fish it down to about 1.5 feet before I retie it. But yeah, that's the same for anything 5 inches plus. If I'm throwing a 4 inches or smaller, I'll go down to maybe 10 or 12, just as a starting point. But I don't think their leader size really affects. They're not afraid of your line size. Is what I'm getting at there.
And that's just on the minnow. Are you using a short leader on a drop shot as well?
Drop shot, I throw a longer leader. I was throwing probably 12 to 15-foot leader. A lot of that is just because when you're fishing those boulders, I mean, if you cast to the backside 6 feet up from your drop shot, it's frayed by the time you drag it back over. So that was just more for efficiency in practice. If I had to retie, I'd have to sit down and retie a new leader every time. Yeah.
What minnows and what drop shot baits are you putting on, and what's your drop shot weight?
Yeah. So minnows, I started off, I had a freeloader on as my, well, I call it a 5-inch minnow. It's like 4.25, but profiles of a 5-inch minnow. So I just grouped that in. And I rotated between that and 5-inch Sakamata. And then for my 6 or 7-inch minnow, I was using a Raid fish roller. I didn't really catch too many fish on that, but that was more just to get them to come up. And then a scented jerk shad from Z-Man, 6 and 7-inch. And then also a big Sakamata.
Guys, anytime you're talking to a sure enough minnow fisherman, Harmon's one of them, Rob G's another one. Like, guys, the people that really catch them on a minnow, everybody throws a freeloader. Everybody throws Sakamatas if they can get them. The Raid fish roller is a really, really popular one. They're hard to find, but they're a great bait. The scented jerk shads you can get literally everywhere and are a great bait as well. Like, everybody gets super detailed into, oh, well, it's got to be tungsten, or, oh, well, it's got to be this color, or it's got to be this, or it's got to be that. But go find your favorite, find something that you can find that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. And if you work it right, they're going to eat it.
Yeah.
Did you see any difference moving between the freeloader and a sock?
Yeah. Beginning of practice, no. I shouldn't say that. I wouldn't know because I only threw a freeloader. And they were eating a freeloader. So obviously they're readily available. I guarantee I've caught more fish on a freeloader than any other minnow. Not even close. So I got a ton of confidence in it. And really the only time I even picked up the Sakamata is when I started realizing some of them were acting a little shy. They had seen it. They were getting smart to it. But yeah, to your point, I've gone down that rabbit hole too. I mean, I've got minnows that I think are secretive and fish I've never seen before. And at the end of the day, everyone ends up going back to the same ones, and even I do. I mean, freeloader, Sakamata, really those two. If in the scented jerk shads, I think you could probably get it done in every state that has a bass on those 3.
I really think so too. And there's some really good looking new ones out there. Jake Lawrence designed one for Yamamoto that looks phenomenal. Feels really good too. Super soft. The freeloaders have came out with a 5 and a 6-inch now, or a 6 and a 7, whatever that one is. Like, I'm excited to get my hands on those. I think they're going to catch them too. Like, guys, don't make it too complicated. It's a lot more about technique and making sure that bait doesn't get below the fish. Talk a little bit about what you would do on these boulders, and the best way, how you pull up to an isolated boulder. You can look down there, you're staring at your scope, that there's 3 to 5 fish on it, something like that. Talk a little bit about how you would, what would your first cast be? Would you work through a rotation of baits, etc.?
Yeah, so in practice, really I couldn't see many fish on the boulders. A lot of them I never saw fish on until I made a cast. And as a result of that, I was starting with a minnow just so I could get them to come up. I mean, I even had some where I was throwing it with no hook. Because if they did come up and get it, I don't want to catch them. I just want to see what they are. So starting off was, I'm going to say 90% of the boulders I fished in practice, I started off with a minnow just from an efficiency standpoint. I mean, if 2 or 3 fish shoot up right away, it's probably not walleye, probably smallmouth. But casting past the boulder, playing around with how far past the boulder you really have to cast. I mean, beginning of practice, you could land that thing on the boulder, it'd be falling straight down on top of it, and they'd shoot up. And by the end of the second day of practice, there could have been 10 on it, and they wouldn't come up. If you did that, you'd have to cast past and make sure by the time your bait got to the boulder, it's already acting right, working right. So playing around with that.
And that was just pressure.
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah, that's just pressure. Yeah, when you go to the lakes where your minnow's sinking down and they shoot up, it's game on.
No doubt. Yeah, when it hits the water and they go straight up, you just like,
yeah, just set the hook when they eat it because that's about to happen. But yeah, that was really for practice. The majority of what I did. That other 10% of the time I wasn't throwing a minnow. It was more so just to see what other baits I could get confidence in to get bites on. I threw a drop shot a decent bit, and I only had 2 bites all through practice on it. Even if I'd throw and see one come up after the minnow, I'd throw a drop shot in there just to see if I could get a couple different things going. I just didn't want to be limited to just the minnow, and obviously I could scratch it all in the tournament anyways, but just to get confidence in a few different things and have options. And then I also played around with, if I pull up to a boulder and throw a minnow and one eats it, if I throw a drop shot in there and he doesn't eat it, if I go to the next boulder and throw a drop shot first, are they just eating the first bait they see? That's the stuff I want to know. Especially, like I said, everyone finds everything. So if I'm making a rotation of boulders, there's 3 in a row and the guy in front of me is throwing a drop shot at him. I want to know, is it something I'm doing with a drop shot, or are they just shooting up and eating it? Like, that's just basically, it's trial and error, but for the most part, a minnow just to make sure there was fish in the area. And then I'd venture towards the larger end, 6 or 7 inch. Again, I don't really care if they eat it in practice. I'm just trying to draw them, and it's the same principle as a glide bait. I mean, if you throw a 4-inch glide bait down a dock or an 8-inch glide bait down a dock, you're going to draw way more out with that 8-inch glide. And minnows are the same way, and I use them a lot in practice with that same mindset of glide bait fishing.
No doubt. No doubt. What are you, a flat note or a flatworm guy on your drop shots? Let's talk a little bit about your drop shot setup.
Yeah, so to me, there's 3 or 4 drop shot styles of baits. You have your typical like half worm, like a smallmouth worm, like a flatworm. Is a couple different companies make that shape. I don't
Yamamoto shad shape worm, the Spro CJ Smasher. There's a bunch of different ones on there.
And that would be your typical smallmouth shaped drop shot bait. Then you have one with a lot more action, like some sort of swim bait.
Like a 2.8 Kitech or something like that.
Yeah, the Fat Impact or the Easy Shiner. And then the third one would be like a cross style bait per se. Trying to think. The X Zone makes one. I know Brandon Polinick I think he top 10 at St. Clair throwing that.
Well, Missile just came out with the mini D-bomb.
Yeah,
that's a cross style. Or Strike King's got the baby Rage Crawl Junior or something like that.
Yeah, like a 3-inch, 3.5-inch cross style bait. And then the last one, and it fits pretty. It can overlap with the first one, but is like just a straight minnow style, like a Z2 scented jerk shads. And that one I'll wider range of sizes. I'll throw a 3 up to a 5-inch on that. But those are when I go into practice, those are what I'm playing with. I'm going to throw all 4 of those at some point in time. And just see which one sticks. I mean, a drop shot's as staple as it gets for smallmouth. They're going to catch them on it somewhere.
Now you mentioned a jig as well. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people think you have to be throwing a spinning rod to catch a smallmouth. And that's just not the case. So talk a little bit about your jig setup.
Yeah. So I'm very prone to a spinning rod. I love catching them on a bait caster, but I personally...
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I personally throw a jig on a spinning rod.
You do?
I do. And the main for smallmouth, not all the time, right? But if I'm fishing offshore for smallmouth, I'll throw it on a spinning rod. And the purpose of that is I'm way more comfortable throwing braid to a leader on a spinning rod than a bait caster. And to me, it's so advantageous when throwing that bait to throw it on braid to a leader. So I throw it on a 7-1 medium fast. It's probably a little bit closer to a medium heavy fast. A lot of backbone, but that's what I throw a jig on. And again, I'm throwing 15-pound fluorocarbon leader.
What's that? Tell me a little bit about the jig itself.
Yeah, there's a couple good ones. Kitech makes a good one. Beast Coast makes a good one. I couldn't even tell you the other brand. That I'm not real particular on one or the other. If it's got a good hook on it and hand-tied skirt, I'm all in. You can go on Tackle Warehouse. There's a dozen options.
But now you're talking about like a 1/4 ounce or a 3/16, 3/8, somewhere in that size, and they're super small, right?
Yeah, I'll go quarters really as small as I personally go. I know they make like a 3/16. I typically go 1/4 to a half. Is my range. But yeah, it's a smaller finesse style jig, football head jig. A lot of them don't have a weed guard. I think for the most part, a weed guard really isn't advantageous at all on those. And then I'm putting either some dead rig style bait or one of those same little craws we talked about before on the back of it.
So you're throwing a 1/2 ounce jig on a spinning rod.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the only time I'll throw a half is if I'm fishing deeper than 25 foot and there's some wind. Then I'll go to a half. I know you and me personally have talked about Nico rigs in the past, and rate of fall is a big deal across every bait. I don't care what you're fishing, drop shot, Nico rig, jig. So there are times in 6 foot of water they just want a 1/2 ounce jig falling and it's a reaction bite, but for the most part, that's not the case.
Gotcha. I mean, would there be any issue? Like, I think for me, if I'm throwing a 3/8 jig, which I throw a finesse jig quite a bit around here, just a little ball head, skipping it around or whatever, can you throw that on 15-pound fluoro and a 7-foot medium heavy fast bait caster and be fine too?
Yeah, absolutely. I know a bunch of guys that do it. I just feel like when I throw a bait caster, and I'm throwing fluorocarbon, I'm moving that bait way more than I want to. If you take a bait caster with fluorocarbon and you shake your jig or hop it, that bait moves way farther forward towards you than if you shake it on braid. It is my opinion. So for me, I feel like I'm just way more precise with a spinning rod, and have way more control over what that bait's doing with braid versus fluorocarbon. I mean, if you pop your jig, you're really like your slack's moving that jig. And I feel like it gets out of the strike zone way quicker than if I'm throwing it on braid.
Now, you had mentioned that these smallmouth are mainly feeding on crawfish,
Mm-hmm.
but you also said that a minnow was your very first cast on these things. Like, I get it during practice. During the tournament, were you still catching a lot of fish on a minnow?
Yeah, day one, I caught every fish I weighed in on a minnow.
That was only 4.
True. It was 4.
My man Harmon, let's back up just a little bit. I was scrolling through the laying in bed after the day one of the tournament. You're welcome. And look down, and my man Harmon has caught like almost 16 pounds in 4 fish. He's the heaviest 4 fish bag of the entire tournament. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope he didn't lose the last one. But he did, made a couple of bad decisions on day one, end up weighing 4, but still got a top 20 with only weighing 9 fish. Now, keep in mind that one day of this deal was canceled as well. But that's impressive, dude.
Yeah, thankfully I didn't lose any day one either, because I'd be kicking myself. I did make a few decisions I'd like to have back, just timing and rotation. But yeah, I had just under 15 on 4, and one of them was like a 152.
So you had some megas.
I had room to grow, and yeah, it is what it is. I'm very happy with how it ended up. But yeah, all 4 of them I caught day one was on the minnow, and like I said, a lot of lakes around here have those rusty crayfish, and I don't know what it is this time of year. I really don't. But when you get to end of July, maybe August, beginning of September, those fish get really tough to catch on craw imitating baits, even though that's what they're eating. That's a very common thing for me. I have no explanation other than maybe you just can't imitate it good enough. Or, I mean, if you were sitting at the table and there's 100 steaks and one, whatever, chicken breast, maybe you're
lobster.
There you go. You're more likely to maybe give that a shot just because the other one's so plentiful. I'm not really sure what it is. I think a lot of times we try to justify what's going through their head and we're way off. So I really don't try to do it too much. I just try and figure out what they're doing. But yeah, that's a pretty common thing. But I also just think it's efficiency. I can just be so much more efficient with a minnow style bait than I can a cross style bait.
About a little bit about your tech. Talk about a little bit. Yeah, that's awesome. Talk a little bit about your technique with the minnow. I heard Drew Gill say one time, and he was talking about the difference between a minnow and a Nico rig, that you have to do everything perfect with a minnow. To whereas a Nico rig, you throw it out there like it doesn't have to be perfect. They eat it off the bottom. They'll eat it on the fall. Talk a little bit about your technique when you are catching these fish on a minnow and how to get them to react and actually bite. I throw it a lot of fish that I know are bass and are following my minnow and will follow it all the way to the boat and get to 25 feet and then just swim back down and never eat it. Talk a little bit about how you get those fish to react and what you were doing technique wise to gather some bites.
Yeah, I think a minnow is the hardest technique to learn. You know, they eat it, but you can pick up a wacky rig and go out on the first day you throw it. You put it in front of them, they're gonna eat it. And a minnow is just not that way. To me, there's really two, I guess, presentations with the minnow. One, you're reeling it away from them. You know, the faster they speed up, the more you speed up your cadence, and bring it away from them and make them catch it. And then the other one is you just keep that sucker consistent no matter what that fish is doing. If he's cartwheeling over it, misses it, whatever, you just keep it consistent. Um, Typically on those structure fish, it's consistent. So, um, I mean, I would get my minnow to the depth zone I wanted it at, and I would keep it at that same depth all the way back to the boat, no matter what that fish did. That's just what worked for me. I mean, you could go to Leech Lake next week and maybe you got to reel them away, but that's typically a somewhat day to day thing. But that's just where playing around with it kind of comes in play. But yeah, every day I'd figure out kind of the range they wanted it. If they wanted it at the top of the boulder, if they wanted it a little ways down from the top of the boulder, they wanted it 3 feet above the boulder. Kind of play around with that, and then once you figured that out, I'd kind of just roll with it all the way back to the boat at that depth.
Would they say you had it at, say the boulder's 5 feet tall? Okay, that's a big boulder, but let's say the boulder's 5 feet tall. We're in how deep were the fish that you were catching? 15?
10 to 16 maybe.
Okay, so boulder's in 12. The boulder's 5 feet tall. You start at 2 feet. You're bringing it right beside the boulder. Are you ever hitting the boulder? You're trying to bring it beside it.
I tried a little bit of both. In practice, it seemed like if I could get my minnow to come right down the side, it worked better than if I went over the top. The issue with going over the top is you can't, if you don't want to drag your minnow up over, like if you're going to hit the boulder, you want to clip it and then you're free swimming again, which is pretty tough to do. It's not in every cast isn't going to do that, but as the tournament went on, that was actually something that if I knew there was a fish there and he followed on the first cast and didn't eat, he turned around and swam back. Sometimes I could get him to bite by, just clipping the side of it and then keep going.
That's pretty juicy there, Harmon.
It's just trial and error. I think, yeah, it's just trial and error.
Would they come out and follow it when they were, when you had it 3 feet above them, and not eat it, and then you would drop it down, to even with the top, and then they wouldn't eat it, and then you drop it down to halfway down the boulder, and then they would? Or how would you go through that progression to figure that out for that day?
Yeah, it was different every day, but I'd start with my bait probably 3 to 5 feet above the boulder. Typically with smallmouth, I think largemouth are probably pretty similar, but maybe all bass really. But the farther you can get them to go to eat your bait, more likely they are to commit. Very rarely is a bass going to swim 15 feet and throw on the brakes. I mean, it happens. We've all seen it, but he's more likely if he swims 3 feet to really investigate it, in my opinion, than if I can get him to swim 12 feet up off the bottom, 10 feet up off the bottom. Normally by the time he gets there, he's ready to eat it. So that's typically where I start, and then kind of play around. I worked my way down, unless, there were a couple boulders I was fishing where I knew they weren't getting much of a break. And then that's where I don't think many guys fish it below the top of the boulder because you lose your minnow. You can see it, and then all of a sudden it's one with the boulder. So that's why I would try strolling it a little lower or clip the side of the boulder.
Are you just shaking the piss out of it the whole time back? Or are you reeling it straight, or how are you?
Changing that too. And that changed more fish to fish, I'd say, really. But I mean, sometimes as fast as and as hard as I can shake that minnow, I'm getting it to roll back and forth like crazy. And other times it's pretty slow and that minnow's rocking, but he's not fleeing per se, and, that was kind of a mood of the fish thing. You get 3, 4 in a row, or maybe an hour and a half in a row where they'd want the same thing, and then they'd kind of change up. Saying that, uh, some of my buddies did the same cadence all week and they caught them all week. So it's not like whatever works for you is what's working everywhere. I think we all fish baits a little different and we think we're all throwing it the same, but we're not. So it was different for me than anyone else I talked to, but they were all different from each other as well.
Let's go back to the jig just a few minutes as well.
Mhm.
Now, on day 2, which was day 3 of the tournament, last day of the tournament, you had one of the biggest bags weighed in, had 19 and change, and you caught most of those on the jig, right?
Yeah, I did.
So how are you fishing that jig around the boulders?
Yeah, so I actually hadn't caught a bass on a jig all week until the last day. I had thrown it a lot. It's a bait, I have pretty good amount of confidence in, but I literally had not had a bite on it all week. But that last day, the wind blew pretty hard. And personally, I did not feel efficient with the minnow and the big waves. A lot of times I struggle with that just because as your boat's going up, you're bringing the minnow up and your boat goes down. You're rolling it, but it's doing this the whole way back, right? And I think that's where a guy gets really inefficient with the minnow. And so I tried to stay away from that. On the actually started out of the wind in the morning until about 10 o'clock, throwing a minnow. Had 4 or 5 follow it and threw it away and just figured I had to scratch it and figure something else out. So I ran to the windiest part of the lake. The jig's obviously a bait you can fish really efficiently in those waves. And the first rock I threw at, I got a 3-something pounder and it kind of progressed. The bite improved as the day went on. The afternoon bite I think was better both days. But yeah, that's where I started with the jig. I'm in a drop shot too, is efficient in the wind, but that was just a gut choice, throwing the jig versus the drop shot.
Where do you think most people mess up when they go to smallmouth specific fisheries like you're going up north? Where's the biggest mistake that most guys make?
In my opinion, and I'll say that. In my opinion, yeah, I'll say it. In my opinion, people spend way too much time fishing drop-offs, bottom depth changes, whatever you want to call it, for smallmouth, and don't spend enough time fishing flats, gradual areas. I'd say that's the biggest mistake.
You think that's a pressure type deal?
I just think the majority of your population isn't going to live on a drop off. It's not going to live on a break. It's not going to live on a steep drop. It's going to live on a flat. Unless we're talking late fall, early spring, early pre-spawn, then I'll fish those drop offs. But smallmouth, for the most part, like to be in an area where they can see 360 degrees around them, especially clear fisheries. They like to be in an area where they're kind of up on a perch. They can, very easily see everything around them. For the most part, largemouth's pretty much the opposite of that. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing with smallmouth is they like to see everything around them.
That's juicy, my man. Okay. We're kind of winding down here. Tell me your most embarrassing story that happened to you on the water.
Like recently or ever?
Ever.
I know there's got to be a bunch, but I try and forget them intentionally. Most embarrassing? Here's a good one. At McKendree, we have these qualifiers. So it's just the kids at McKendree compete. We have 6 tournaments, and that's how you get ranked, and that's how you determine how many tournaments the college pays for. And we had a qualifier, and I'm fishing literally the biggest community hole out of any lake we fish. there's boats, my buddies. It's all my buddies, right? We're all in a row, and my jig gets stuck in the rocks. It's probably 6 feet deep. And I stand on the trolling motor, go to get my jig off right away in the morning. My trolling motor was covered in dew. My foot slips off, but my back foot got caught between my graph mount and the floor. I went underwater, my rod broke, and the only thing in my body sticking above water was my ankle and my foot.
Oh my God, you could have drowned.
I know. I was completely underwater. I mean, I tell it from my point of view, but I often think of it from those other guys' point of view. They hear a splash, and literally all I can see is my foot, which is stuck up on the front deck, and the rest of my body's underwater.
I mean, were you able to shake it loose? And
I let the rod go and just tried to get back up to the surface and spun myself around and got my ankle out. But our coach actually later that day went out there with, I think he had an anchor or something. He drug around on there for about an hour and a half and got the rod and reel back. But yeah, that was pretty embarrassing. I mean, it would have been bad if I was alone. The fact I had 5 of my friends right there next to me that will never let me live it down. Pretty tough.
I could see that completely.
Yeah.
I could see that completely. Well, what's the funniest thing you've ever seen happen to anybody else on the water?
The funniest thing? Again, I went to school with a bunch of clowns. I call them my friends. I don't know. A kid named Jackson, I fished a tournament with him on lacrosse. We're fishing out in the main river. His back hurt. I don't know what from. And we're fishing a eddy, and he leans back on his motor. I literally have no idea what happened, but he just lost his balance and put all his weight back and flew off the back of the boat into the Mississippi. And I'm on the front deck on spot lock. I turn around and he's literally just floating down the river.
Did you catch up with him the next pull
he's
down?
waving his rod in the air. I'm like, dude, what in the world happened? Like, there's no wind, nothing, completely still. And it wasn't like he went to lean on the motor. I mean, he was leaning on it for 5 minutes and all of a sudden just lost his balance and down the Mississippi he went. But out of ones I can tell here, I think that's probably the best one I got.
I mean, anything goes on Take It to the Bank, Harmon. We can talk about some wild stuff here.
Yeah, it's probably my best interest to leave it at that one.
Since you just graduated, I guess the statute of limitations are still there.
It feels like the right thing to do to end there.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well, guys, hope you've learned a lot about catching smallmouth up north. You know, what we've talked about here is going to work at Mille Lacs. It's going to work at, obviously, Leech Lake. It's going to work at a lot of those inland fisheries that aren't Great Lakes. But the Great Lakes fish, I mean, to me, northern smallmouth set up the same, whether they're, you know, on Lake Erie or St. Clair or wherever.
Pretty similar.
As long as there's no current. Now, to me, the St. Lawrence River is kind of a beast of its own. But, you know, you can even go look for these fish on Lake Champlain or otherwise. You know, you're still looking for boulders. You're still looking for these same things. Those same 5 or 6 baits are going to get you bit.
For sure. Yeah, it's a little variance, you know, from state to state, lake to lake, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent.
Well, guys, I want to thank Harmon for coming out today, hanging out with us, bestowing some wisdom. Again, you may not have heard of him yet, but I promise you next year, going to fish the Opens next year?
That's the plan.
You're going to see his name at the top of the leaderboard. Dude's an absolute hammer. Dude is an absolute hammer. Proud to call him a friend, even though he talks funny. Likewise. So join us next week. We're going to be talking about maybe some Mississippi River fishing. The Elite Series are up there this week. Last Elite tournaments. If you're fantasy fishing, you got to get your picks in here pretty quick because this is the last one. So, guys, you can take it to the bank.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank.